We're good. We got it. Professional quality of First Baptist Church of Portales.
Yay.
From a cell phone recording thing. So we're in Matthew chapter 2. So
You're good. Your head is not cut off.
it's not cut off.
You're
Perfect.
good.
Thank you. Yeah. So full disclosure. Number one, like I've realized I use like every pastor has their sayings they come to and they use. Full disclosure is one of the ones I say like all the time. And I've caught myself now. And I'm like, why do I say that all the time? And I'm sure there's other ones, so don't bring them to my attention because then I'll be worried about all of that.
I mean, you're fully disclosing, so.
Yeah,
As long as it's true.
Today's, I was writing this lesson out and I kind of got done with it and I was like, this feels more like a sermon than a lesson, but we'll see. Like, you know, lessons I try to do walkthroughs and how does this piece fit here, and sermons are more like, here's the general scale and here's the application, and I got to the end of it and I was like, this is a sermon, not a lesson. So I'm going to try to rebrand it as I go. We'll see where we land with all of that. So, Matthew chapter 2. Let me start by just reading it, and we'll get an idea about where we want to do stuff. So, chapter 2. I'm just going to go through 1 through 12 tonight, and then again, we're never going to finish the book of Matthew, but we'll take one step at a time. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked all of them where the Christ would be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they told him, "because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. Because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, report back to me, so that I too can go and worship him." After hearing these things, they went on their way. And there it was, the star that they had seen at its rising, and it led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. And entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, falling to their knees. They worshipped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. Anybody heard that story before? About 75 times. This is the fun part when you're doing like, how do you gain a new perspective on stuff like this without like running all the way off to left field and be like, like that's not my goal in any of this. So honestly, the way I'm going to present it, right, is you got 3 character types and 3 character types respond to Jesus. And you've probably heard 10 to 15 sermons about this exact thing. But my goal is to contextualize it and see why do these people respond this way, and really what is Matthew trying to communicate through these responses. So if you go back to chapter 1 in verse 20, right? I mentioned this I feel like multiple times in the last few weeks, but angel tells Joseph, "You're to name him Jesus because he will save his people from their sins." So what is the purpose of this child to be? To save people from their sins. Particularly save who? In this, according to verse 20 and 21. Yeah, the Israelites. This is to save his people in reference to Abraham all the way through. And so Matthew's pointing back this. And what's really interesting is you jump right into chapter 2. And who is the first people to worship this newborn baby? It's not Israelites.
Yeah.
It's foreigners. That's really interesting. So I think Matthew's making a claim in this. And Matthew's really good about never making an exact claim. Instead, he's going to present to you the story and want you to meditate, think through that story, and come to the claim yourself. And so, what is Matthew telling us? I think Matthew's already said he's going to save Israel from their sins, but oh, by the way, this baby is for everybody. So right here in chapter 2, we see this theme start to unfold of Jesus to redeem Israel where they failed, but also to redeem the world because it matters to the entire world. Other thing that I would just say about this story, and we don't, I gotta be careful, I don't mean to say this rudely, but we're so accustomed to like high fantasy stories, right? Like Lord of the Rings. So we set ourselves in this world where it's like, yeah, there's magic and these types of things happen. And honestly, if you were to stumble upon this story, having never read the Bible before in your life, come on, there's magi's, there's magic people, and I know I'm being speculative, but magic people following a star to the birth of a prophesied son. This sounds like something Tolkien could have written. Am I wrong? Like, it's very fantasy in that sense. And I don't believe it is fantasy. Please hear me. I do not think that's true. But if you read this at face value, there are some very fantastical, is that the word?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I only know that from the Harry Potter fantastical piece. So there's some very fantastical stories that are being told about these foreigners and this star and this prophecy being fulfilled and a bad guy king and you can build a Lord of the Rings book off of this very thing. And, is the Bible shying away from that? Absolutely not. So what's the claim about this chosen one and evil's going to attempt to snuff it out or him out? And so what's going on? We'll see if we can do all of this. But I'd also just go ahead and say to that, we're living in a time period. Now, if we could get back to their time period, they were living in a time period where these types of things are real to them. They lived in a time where prophecies and oracles and that it was a part of everyday life, that people would come into town, I have a prophecy, and whether they were true or not, like, this is how they thought about things. And so dreams and events pointing to like an encroaching new reality. And there's this overwhelming sense of the uprising of a new leader, especially among nations of the East. So when you get kind of out to the eastern side of the Roman Empire and even outside of that, and you go back and read some like Roman historians, they talk about these eastern countries had these weird concepts of like foreign leaders coming to conquer the world. So I went in and read some of this. So Suetonius, you guys know who Suetonius is? He's a Roman historian. Suetonius wrote like in the hundreds AD, and so he was writing about 100 years prior, right, when Jesus would have been born. And one of his quotes is, there had spread all over the Orient. So when he says Orient, what does he mean? Spread all over the East. Yeah. So they're spread all over the Orient an old and established belief that it was fated at that time for men coming from Judea to rule the world. So he's saying, these people 100 years ago were talking, someone's going to come from Judah. Where they came from, what they meant by that, he never says. He just says there were some rumblings over in the eastern areas. This is coming from a Roman historian. No agenda on his part. He's just saying, this is what they were saying. You guys have probably heard Tacitus, right? Tacitus was another Roman historian, political figure, about the same time, a couple years before Suetonius. But he wrote this. In most, there was a firm persuasion that in the ancient record of their priests was contained a prediction of how at this very time the East was to grow powerful and rulers coming from Judea were to acquire a universal empire. So he's saying these people in their own little priesthoods in the East, whatever it was, kept coming out and saying like, guys, something's coming from Judea, something's coming from Israel, a new power to rule the world. Where do they get this? I can hypothesize, I don't know. Matthew doesn't say.
I heard somebody hypothesize on the wise men recently. I never thought about it, but there's a good chance these wise men were the descendants of the people Daniel taught.
Daniel, yeah. I'm going to go back and mention that verse. And I think that's what's happening. Matthew is drawing out to say there was a remnant seed planted back in the time of when Daniel was in exile. And the seed has blossomed and bloomed to where these people, even if they missed the entirety of who Yahweh was and his identity, picked up enough to know something's coming. There was this overwhelming sense of something's got to give, something's got to happen, because if the world maintains this trajectory, it's doomed. And this was their feeling. And with that, I would just say, like, really, has anything changed today? I know we don't do oracles and we're very non-superstitious as a society for the most part, not always, but like, do we have this overwhelming feeling of something's got to give, or the direction we're going is going to eventually lead to total ruin? Because I have that feeling a lot of times, and I think most churches have that feeling. And people have had that feeling for generations, because every generation has been pretty much more or less convinced that Jesus was going to come back in their time period. And, I've heard 1,000 people say it, and I've said it. And if he doesn't, one of these days, my grandchildren will say it. And so this is what they're doing. They're just thinking about all of this, and it causes some things to happen. So let's talk about the character types, and then we'll kind of see. So, chapter 2, verse 1 through 3. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star rising and have come to worship him." And when King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, in Jerusalem with him. So there's actually four characters. The first one, his name's at the very top of the sentence.
Jesus.
Okay, so Jesus. We'll go back and do this. So we got Jesus. Who's the next character?
Herod.
Yep, King Herod. Who's the next characters group? Yeah, Magi. I ran out of room. I should have thought about this more. The Magi, or the wise men, and then who are the fourth set of characters? I actually didn't fully read it. I should have went through verse 5 or verse 4. So we assembled all the chief priests and scribes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So religious leaders. These are going to be the four characters at play in the opening narrative of Jesus' birth in Matthew's Gospel. So we start with this concept of Jesus. What is Jesus doing?
Being born.
Being
I know, it's a weird question, right?
Nothing right now.
He is existing.
Appearing. He's appearing.
That's it, right? Like, Jesus is not acting. He's a baby. He's an infant. Jesus is crying, and having to be totally cared for in every capacity by Mary and Joseph, because that's what babies do. They need help. Jesus doesn't just come out of, it's a worthwhile debate, but does Jesus realize when he's an infant baby that he's going to be the savior of the world? I don't think so, because the Bible says that he grows in knowledge and stature and strength, and so Jesus grows in to this idea. Now he's perfect, and he's always perfect because he's the total embodiment of God in flesh and God the Spirit, one and the same. But at this point in his life, he is a baby. So the only thing Jesus is doing is existing. And what does the mere existence of Jesus cause?
Chaos.
Turmoil, right? Just by existing in the world, Jesus is and I don't want to say creating problems, but what he's doing by existing is he's challenging the norms.
Mm-hmm.
And the main norms being, gotta put an R in there. The main norms being King Herod and the religious leaders. That's what the existence of Jesus is doing. So I point all that to say, when you live in a world where Jesus exists, there will be turmoil. Because the mere existence of Jesus challenges the lordship of our own lives. And we don't like that, because we like to be in control. And Jesus' existence says, no, you don't get to be in control of all of this. So, I just want to set that up to start with. Now what I want to do is kind of go in, break some of this down, do a little bit of contextualization to these things, and then see where we land. So we'll start with the Magi, the wise men. Where are they from? The East. It's probably a direct reference to Babylon, right? So these people are, and we've already answered this, but are they Israelites? No. Do they worship Yahweh?
No.
Not really. I mean, there may be some seeds of stuff in there, but it's not like they grew up obeying Torah law. Mm-hmm. They're pagans, right? So you got pagans. So how do they know about this? And we've already talked about it, but let me just Daniel chapter 2. So in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. No one can interpret his dream, so they keep going, and finally they find Daniel. And as a pastor, I should be able to just turn to Daniel. There it is. Thank you. So Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and Nebuchadnezzar responds in chapter 2, verse 46. I'll let you guys get there. The first thing Nebuchadnezzar does is he falls face down and worships Daniel. Mm-hmm. So what does that say about Nebuchadnezzar?
He's a pagan.
He's a pagan. Yeah. He doesn't get it. He's like, oh man, this guy's doing it. I'll worship him. And then he gave orders to present an offering of incense to him. And the king said to Daniel, "Your God is indeed God of gods." And like, okay, well, why are you worshiping Daniel?
Yeah, really.
Is God of gods, Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you are able to reveal this mystery. And the king promoted Daniel and gave him many generous gifts, and he made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief governor over all the wise men, right? I don't think Matthew is unaware of this. Why does Matthew say they come from the east? Is that just a fun detail? He's like, oh, just don't know they came from the east. Because he didn't have to say that. He could have said, one day wise men showed up in Jerusalem. They journeyed from a long way away. But he says east. I think, I'm reading between lines. It's interpretation, I get it. But I think Matthew is trying to communicate, like, these are the people that were influenced under what happened 500, 600 years ago. There's something happening here. So although they are pagans, there is some sort of, I'm going to call it like a Yahweh influence. But how are these people looking to comprehend and understand God's movement within the world? They're looking at stars. We have a term, and I always get this term wrong. We've already done this before. But what is the term for when you look at stars to try to predict the future? Or astrology. I think it's not too far-fetched to say that these magi are astrologists. And it's not like horoscopes in the same way, but it's still very much. They believe the stars communicate to them in some divine form or fashion. And so they'll wake up every morning really early to look up and try to see the stars. And one day they see something that's a little bit different. Catches their attention. And there's been thousands of people speculate over, was it a comet? Was it... I tend to think, after watching a documentary, that it was two planets, Jupiter and Venus, lining up over each other, because the solar system works like a giant clock. You can just trace it all back. It's all physics. They have computer programs to do it, and so he went back and found like there is all this stuff and evidence of. I just think it's cool. But anyways, they're astrologists. This it's like some weird mixture of like science and astrology. And maybe we could put like astronomy in there in some ways, because they're still trying to understand all of this. But how are they convinced that God communicates with them?
Through the heavens.
Through the heavens. And also through dreams, because that was another just standard point in the practice back east, that God is going to communicate us, if whoever God is, through the stars and through dreams, through all of these mystical things.
And still is.
Yeah. Like this,
They still think that.
This is what's going on. They still absolutely think that. And what they've ended up doing now is creating this synchronistic, hybrid, sort of like monotheism mixed with string theories of like other things. And welcome to what humanity is really good at doing. You still will run into this. This is going to go online, so I'm going to get, I think like Catholicism does this in some ways. Like whenever you start talking about like the patron saint of coffee, and like that kind of feels a little bit like paganism to me. Like, and I'm not trying to be over the top critical. I understand that a Catholic would say you're misconstruing that. Fair enough. But like we're really good at synchronizing up our own traditions with our faith, and then misunderstanding stuff. And so 600 years, Daniel made a really great imprint. But there's some other things that have leaked into this. Does that stop God from communicating to these people? No, right? God is still going to communicate to this. So it's kind of this mixture of Yahweh influence, astrology, like Daniel / paganism. I wrote pagan up here. But this whole syncratic, is that the word? Of mixing together. The other thing that I would say is these particular people, the wise men, they are almost like what the Levites were to Israel as to their society. So they're the priesthood. They're the ones that interpret the stars and tell the people about what God is trying to communicate. This is their job. And so if they show up into a town, you give them an audience because they're pretty wealthy, they're high class, they have a lot of stuff going on. So when a bunch of them show up to town, what happens?
People pay attention.
Why are they here? What are they here about today? This is exactly what happens. It's not outlandish. So yeah, it sounds a little bit fantasy, but at the same time, it is a very historic reality of what these wise men would have been like from the east, this royal class of Levites. So when a caravan shows up to town, it's a big deal. And I would just truly come out and say again, they don't just see the stars as interesting. It's not like the stars are so pretty. I love going outside at night and looking at the stars. Isn't it romantic? They think there's something there. There's something divine in the midst of it. So I asked all of this, and I know I spent a long time talking about it, but what does this tell us about God?
He controls everything.
He controls everything. That God is able to use the language of every culture. God uses the language of every culture. I'm sorry, Tom, that my phone's like right in our line of sight. I'm just like writing words today, but God uses the language of all cultures. And so what's the reason that God's willing to communicate with these wise men? Why? Why would he even give them this idea? I mean, they're theologically pretty problematic. It's not like they totally get this idea. They've missed out on what God's been doing throughout the inference of calling out Israel and giving them the Torah. These are people that they're just way off on the east. Why does God communicate to them? Because he loves them. Absolutely.
There's a plan.
He has a plan. And I would say because they're seeking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That God responds to those who seek.
Mm-hmm. They are responsive to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. They were.
So when you get into Matthew's gospel, do you know some of the type of quotes about seeking that Jesus is going to say? Yeah, you know, any quotes about Jesus where he uses the term seek? Seek, and all these things will be added unto you.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus is going to talk about be a seeker, right? Seek. You always got to say King James version because it's seek and ye shall
find. Knock and the door
shall be open. What is Jesus' desire for humanity? That they would start looking.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is God faithful to go and find those people looking for him?
Yes.
Absolutely. This is what I think Matthew's trying to communicate. Because are these people seeking?
No.
And God's not going to interfere if these people are content doing their own thing. And we'll talk about it, but it's amazing that these magi show up, like, we think there's a king here born. Where would he be born? Like, oh, it says in Micah that he'd be born in Bethlehem. Like, you would think, that's 6 miles away. You're like, oh, I'd like to really actually go see this. This is really interesting. They're like, I don't know, They're not seeking. They don't care.
Check it out and come back to us.
Yeah, so who's the one that God's going to respond to? The one who's looking.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I want to be careful because sometimes we can carry this too far into like, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you're... No, not that. Never that. But God is faithful to fulfill other people's seeking. So a lot of people will ask me questions like, well, Philip, what about people that don't believe in the gospel? Right? What about them? How is it fair if a person in the Bush tribe of Africa dies without Jesus but never knew Jesus to begin with and no one ever told him and God sees that? That's not fair, right? And I think that misses this point. Because number one, I would say Romans 1, that we're without excuse because God's imprint is on the world. It's his divine attributes, his power been demonstrated through creation. So no man is without excuse. That's Romans 1:21. And so no man can ever just be like, and if that were the case, like if the way people could be saved was by not knowing, then we are really sending everyone to hell in a handbasket. Like, we should all shut up and not talk. It would be much better for the world if this thing just died out and everyone didn't hear about it. And I don't think that's what God's called us to do. But what we find is God is faithful to those who seek him. So any other Bible stories, and I got a couple on my head, but any other Bible stories where God intentionally finds people seeking him and saves them?
Some of the disciples.
Yeah, the disciples. Paul. My favorite one is Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. Because this Ethiopian eunuch is just like, it's such a crazy story. There's all this amazing stuff going on in the city, and Philip's a part of it, and God's like, go to the deserted road. That sounds like a waste of my time, God. That road's deserted, and I'm called to tell people about you. And it's go. And so he's walking along this deserted road, and what does he find? This Ethiopian eunuch who's doing what? He's seeking. He's trying to get these answers. And so Philip comes up. What are you reading? I'm reading Isaiah. Do you understand what you're reading?
No.
I need help, man. All right, guess what? All of it's about Jesus. And what happens to the Ethiopian eunuch? You get saved. Here's this is so Tim Keller wrote a book called Reason for God, and so he just talks about some of this stuff. And his whole premise is, and he uses this illustration, like imagine you were in the desert and you're just all alone, no source of life around you, and one night you see a spark of light over the hill, like a city or something like that, and you decide to walk the opposite direction.
No.
Whose fault is that?
Yours.
That's your fault. God has given all of us a spark of light, no matter where you are. And I would even argue God's given a spark of light to people in Bush Tribe Africa. And if that person truly seeks God, what is God faithful to do? Put stuff in the stars if he needs to. He can speak any culture. He can speak any language. And again, I'm not trying to endorse any particular thing, but the Jesus movement in the 70s. Do you guys know the kind of starting figure of the Jesus movement? His name's Lonnie Frisbee.
Yeah.
You guys remember this? You guys know how Lonnie Frisbee came to Christ? He tripped out on acid and had some crazy encounter, and when he came to, realized, I have totally got this wrong and I need to seek God. He went, found a church, got saved. Like, would I recommend? Like, no. But is God faithful to answer those who seek him? There's a book called Wind in the House of Islam. And the whole book is about just this constant reality of Muslims that are having dreams just left and right. And it's never a dream where they just wake up and are saved. It's, if you want to know, go seek out this person. And they go and they find a church, or they go and they find a missionary. And if you've read the book The Insanity of God by Nick Ripken, this is his whole premise of what God's doing in just worlds that we as Americans don't, we're so comfortable, we don't seek. And so we don't get stories like this. I've told this one before too, and I'm sorry I'm just like hounding on this, but I just find this incredibly fascinating. Whenever I was in seminary, I got the chance to go speak at the Association of Theological Seminaries biannual event. And so they brought 7 different students who had unique seminary experiences. Mine was like, I did it all online. And we got to spend a few minutes talking about what the value of our seminary experience was. So like me, they had a guy that did his entire seminary in prison. And got out of prison and became, so that was really cool to hear from him. A guy that did his seminary at a like Cuban site because he grew up in Cuba, and it was just like 2 people. And but anyways, they had one guy that was from India, and he gets up to tell his story, and he said, I grew up Hindu, multiple gods, and one night I had a dream that there were blood on my hands, and I would try to wash the blood off and it wouldn't come off. And I would just continually try to wash the blood off and it wouldn't come off. And finally a man walked up to me and said, you need to go to this address if you want to be clean. He said, I had that dream like 3 or 4 times. And so finally he goes to that address, and guess what he finds? A seminary. So he walks into the seminary, says, I've had this dream, I don't know what to do. They say, well, let me tell you about it. He gets saved, and I think it's this. God is faithful to seekers. God's faithful to his mission. And there's good stuff in that. Now, does that give us the freedom? Like, well, if people are going to seek, God's going to find them, so we can just hang out at First Baptist and not worry about it. No. But that is to say, if we're willing to let God use us, guess the type of people that God will bring to this church?
Those seekers.
Seekers. And then we have the chance to respond to them. So even today, you guys met Justin, you know, he got the little baby. He and I go and get coffee today, and he's like, Philip, I just don't know if I'm saved or not. I'm trying to figure this out. I made a decision when I was 14. I fell away, got into drugs. What's he doing?
He's seeking.
He's seeking. Why does God bring him here?
Because
he gets to find answers, right? And so I get to sit down today and say, okay, we can nail this down right here, right now. And so we talked, and we're going to have a couple more conversations, but I'm going to go ahead and bet you he probably wasn't saved when he was 14 and didn't really get it. And we're hopefully, prayerfully going to baptize him soon, because he's going to say, I'm in with this, right? That's amazing. God sends us secrets. We just have to be attuned to it and listen to it. So, yeah, is Matthew condoning astrology?
No.
No, that's not Matthew's point in this. Matthew is talking about how God has the right to use anything he can to draw people to him, even people that are pagan and far off. And he's been doing this for how long? How long has God been setting this up for these magi? Since Daniel. Like, God's been in the background working this out for 600, 700 years. And it's just a good reminder that God sees all time. And yeah, I'm ranting at this point. I just think that's fascinating.
Even
So,
Jesus' ministry, he was looking for seekers.
yeah,
He would tell a parable and say, he who has an ear, let him hear and walk away.
yeah.
It was the seekers that he wanted. He didn't care about the people that were just there to see his miracles.
You want to follow me? You can come, but I'm not going to force you to come.
He told his disciples too, if you go into a town and they don't want you, leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shake the dust off your feet.
Forget you.
Yeah.
Go on. You're all right. You know. Yeah. So that's the Magi. Let's talk about King Herod. Most of history knows him as Herod the Great. Is he great?
No.
He was great politically.
Greatly terrible.
Yeah, he was a political, like, Rome's like supreme, like, political dream guy, because he was part Arabian, part Hebrew, but he sided with the Romans politically, and so they could put him in where he was enough of a bridge gap to appease the Hebrews, but at the same time, he was a puppet for Rome, is what he was. But there's, he got to have this leadership role. And he even did things like he built a new temple, a bigger and better temple than what Solomon even built. It was like this revolutionary temple. It wasn't long until that got destroyed, but he did that. And he ends up going down the path that every kind of ruler and emperor did in this time frame, and that's the path of paranoia. So there's even a quote from Caesar Augustus where Caesar said, it is better to be a pig in Herod's house than his own son. You know why?
Apt.
Because he killed his sons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, he's and why would he kill his sons?
He didn't want anyone
He thought they were threatening his throne.
No.
So there's this whole legacy of him killing his sons and wives and mother-in-laws, and like he is just, you threaten my throne, you're out of here. You're dead. I'm gonna go on a killing spree, wipe everything off. What is it in King Herod's character to do? Murder. Like it is what it is. But I think so King Herod is like a Roman puppet. He's leadership hungry. Is leadership hungry a way you would say that? Control hungry is probably a better way, but
Egotistical. No.
yeah, egotistical. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, so he's all of this. This is the idea and identity of King Herod. And so what is King Herod's response whenever the wise men come in and say, hey, we've seen the star, we think there's a new king.
He wants to kill him.
Where is he?
Now he's going to frame it well. He's a king. He's not stupid. But, King Herod did not get his puppet role, even if it was a puppet role, by being dumb. Intelligent guy. Probably well-versed, well-read, he knows stuff. So he knows, I got to play this off smooth or this isn't going to end well for me. And so, hey, where is he? Let me worship him as well. But King Herod, by the mere existence of Jesus, is faced with this problem of what? If Jesus is real, and if he is king and if he is Lord, what does that do?
He loses control.
It challenges his lordship. So he gets challenged. He's called on the carpet for what he is and who he is. And the question stands, right? If this is real, what am I going to do? And what has he done in the past? Like,
Eliminate.
I got 3 dead sons in the closet. Like, if this is real, I know exactly how to deal with this. And it's this question of, if Jesus' lordship challenges my perception of my own lordship, how do I respond? With anger and hostility and frustration. And I think Matthew is painting King Herod as this model of how do we respond? Because guess what Jesus does to us as well? He challenges our own lordship, right? Which I was thinking, I've had this conversation before, but I'll have it again. I'll even use it right here. Challenge lordship. Is lordship a word?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good deal. Thank Thank you, Shannon, for always knowing that. If I've talked about this before, you can just take it and we'll go. But when do we ever use the word Lord in like regular conversation in the English language? I can think of one instance, like outside of Christianity.
Just Lord of the Manor.
Yeah,
Lord of the Manor?
Not really here in America.
Yeah,
So, we really don't use that here in
Yeah.
America. Sure.
Lord over you.
To lord something over somebody. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's a fair one. I've not heard that one. You're right. We'll say like, well, they're lording that over you. So what does that mean?
They're holding it over.
They're
you.
putting control over top of you so that they can manipulate what you do, right? So it's like puppet strings over that. The one thing that I think of is the term landlord.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah. So what is a landlord?
Lord of the land that you're living in.
It's the person that owns the place in which you're living. Yeah. And so when someone is your landlord, what do they own?
You're right.
Your
They own
property.
the house and the property. And so what are they going to do as landlord?
They're gonna make all the decisions.
They get to
Yeah.
put a lot of rules and
Oversee
decisions.
it.
And so it doesn't matter how much you might want a kitty cat. If your landlord says no kitty cats, you can argue all the day long. I have the right to have a kitty cat, and kitty cats love me, and I love them, and everything's good, and it's all about. You see where I'm going with this? And the landlord's going to come in and say, "Yeah, but it's my house, so
Too bad.
too bad. It's my rules." The thing is, we like our own lordship. And to consider God Lord means that we have to give up our rights and our opinions and our ideas of being in control and in charge. And what does Jesus do? He challenges our lordship. And some people respond this way. Absolutely not. I'm totally anti that. I will never give my life over to him. And I would just as well kill this entire movement if it means I don't have to do this. And they'll frame it very well. Herod is very good at saying, like, where is he? I'll go worship him too. And it's conniving and it's lying and it's because he doesn't want to give up his own lordship. This is the character that Matthew paints as King Herod. And it's this total inverse of Jesus. Because Jesus is going to say, like, thy will be done. And Herod's going to say, my will be done. That was a super pastoral thing to say. But cheesy southern pastor right there. This is Herod. And so if this is about how God answers the seekers, what is King Herod about? It's about how God stands against self-imposed lords. That I am in control. So that's Herod. And we got one more, the other people, and that is the chief priests, the religious leaders. Who are these people? Pharisees. So what marks them? What are their characteristics?
Well, they're power hungry too.
They're power hungry.
Self-righteous.
Pretty arrogant.
Arrogant, yeah.
Very religious.
Very educated.
Man-made religion.
They're smart as all get out. So someone said something that's power hungry, religious, smart, arrogant. I like arrogant. Yeah. This is the I figured it out lifestyle.
Yeah, they've got all the answers.
Yeah. I'm comfortable enough. I know the answers. I live in a nice house. I think, I could be wrong, I think most of us in modern America tend to navigate to this category. Even if because we're very comfortable. We've got most of the things figured out. We have access to anything we could ever want to know, like right here, right now. Like, what's the need of seeking when we have it? And we'll even, like, seeking is good, but we'll even be like, generally, like, my Bible's there, and I know I can read it whenever I want to, so, like, I don't have to worry about that. And I'm not saying that's how they were, but this is kind of where they come from. And so, what is their response to this? King Herod goes to them and says, hey, I got these magi. They're saying there's been a king born. I don't know anything about that, guys. What do you know? Oh, yeah, we read Micah before.
Right here.
Says right here, be born in Bethlehem. So they give him the answer because they're smart. And then what do? They freak out. Why do they freak out? Because they know the tendency of King Herod, and they think, well, he might go on a killing spree if we don't appease him. And so I think, and again, I'm making some inferences here, and I get that. I think they respond out of apathy and not doing anything because they're fearful that if they entertain this idea of a new king, what's Herod going to do?
Kill them.
He might kill them. Matthew doesn't say that. He doesn't say that directly. But I think they say like, yeah, but praise be to you, King Herod. Like, we don't really think there's a new king. We're just going to sit here. And they're so comfortable that they're not willing to get out of their comfort zones to be challenged. We got the nice affluential houses. We have the status. We have anything and everything. We're well fed. None of us are at risk at losing our jobs or going hungry. And this is a time that a lot of people would go hungry. Like, that's just a regular part of humanity, is there are people starving. And they're like, we're safe, so we don't want to worry about this. We're hands off.
And the Pharisees believed that the Messiah was just a great leader, not
Yeah.
that it was God incarnate.
Yeah, he's just going to be a good military leader.
They figured, we got a good thing going, and a Messiah might mess all that up.
Yeah. And if he's going to come be a military leader, we'll deal with him when he is. But if he's just a baby, what's a baby going to do? Exist?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, if they only knew.
yeah, if they only knew, right? Exactly. So they're in close proximity. They know the answers, but they have no desire to be with Jesus themselves. And I think like, this is modern day Portales. Because like the vast majority of people I talk to in this town would identify as knowing about Jesus. Oh yeah, I know about Jesus. I go to church on Easter, like sometimes. But they live life over here because they're comfortable. They know just enough to not have to think about it too much. They don't really need to worry about seeking. And in the process, they become apathetic to what God's doing. And they just live their own lives and miss out on what it means to let Jesus be Lord. And this is what I think Matthew is presenting. I think just through presenting a story, saying here are three types of people. And then the question is, Yahweh saves, comes to save. And what is the response that he wants from us? What's the positive response? The Magi's. And so is it a response about heritage? Or lineage? Or no, that's not the response God's looking for. It's a response about trusting and getting uncomfortable. Like, how long are these people traveling for?
Yeah.
A long time.
2 years is the general idea that they were going. Because even when you read down in verse 10, when they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy in entering the house. When you go read Luke, where are they after Mary gives birth? In a manger. And now they're in a house. So we think this may even be a couple years. Like maybe Jesus might be 1.5, 2.
They call him a child, not a
Yeah,
baby.
they call him a child at this point. Yeah.
Babylon was about 800 miles away. So.
Yeah. You're not traveling anywhere fast. You have a whole caravan because you're carrying really expensive stuff. You know, we like that they
And
breathe
you have
life.
to have they probably wouldn't imagine a protection.
Protection, yeah. They got bodyguards. They got, people with swords. It's enough people that when they walk into Jerusalem, it throws the whole town into an uproar. Like, this isn't just 3 guys on camels.
Right.
This is a convoy. And so, you
Don't
got,
walk very fast.
if you're going to follow a star, how are you going to travel?
At night.
How far are you going to travel? Because you're not going to walk all night long. So you might get an hour or 2 while you can see the stars and travel. Maybe you wake up really early and do it. And then you're like, oh, the sun's up. I don't know what the stars are. So let's camp out and wait till the stars come back out. We'll walk. So it takes them a long time. And they never turn back. This is what God's looking for. That when we seek, we would say, I'm laying it all aside, putting my own comfort, and I'll give every ounce I can to find this king. And God blesses them. And God uses them in incredible ways. And now we get to read their story. God is in the business of using the unexpected people to do the unexpected thing. Because what he wants from us is seeking, not controlling and not being complacent. Right? Welcome to what I think Matthew's claim is about how Christ is going to work for and be for the nations. So yeah, this is just my thing. And then we end up, this is what we'll talk about next week, just because I think this is fascinating. But then what ends up happening to Mary and Joseph? They're ran out of town.
Yeah.
Hey Mary, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. You're going to give birth to Jesus, and he's going to be the Savior of mankind. Oh, and within the first 2 years, you're going to be ran out of your home and chased off to a foreign land, and a bunch of babies are going to die. And
Because of it.
whoa, what's going on? So welcome to the claims of Matthew. You guys got anything else you would add? I told you it was kind of like sermon-esque. Like, which are you, the King Herod, the man? This is where you have the invitations, right? Is anybody in here a magi? If you're a magi this morning, seeking, just we're gonna have a time of prayer.
Well, when we were talking about the lordship,
Yeah.
I think about Haley's lesson last night when we talked about the Lordship. She showed this video.
Yeah.
You probably saw the video with the guy and the dogs.
Yeah.
Because if we give control over, we have more freedom.
Yeah.
Than we do on our own. And she proved that, she showed that example of a guy had his dogs with him, and he said, these dogs have freedom, even though they have no leashes, or, they have more freedom because they have given control over to me.
Yeah.
And he would say, go play. And the dogs would just go like this, and he'd say, come to me. And the dogs would just instantly come to him.
Yeah.
Or he'd say, and he was walking, he'd say, sit. The dogs would stay. He'd keep walking, come to me. And the dogs would come right to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's what God wants for us.
Yeah,
Just to
exactly.
be in that state. So
God's not looking to
Giving-
leash you up and control you.
right,
He's
yeah.
looking to
So we
invite
have,
you.
we think we're giving up control, and not. We will have more freedom
Yeah. Yeah.
if we do give up the control.
Yeah, it's hypothetical and irrelevant in some ways, but like, what would have King Herod's life been like had he come submitted his lordship to this new baby?
Yeah.
He probably wouldn't have went on murder sprees. That's a good thing. I'm just saying. There probably was some better things to come out of it all. It's the times we hold to our own lordship that we totally ruin our own lives because it's the dog wandering out into the street until we get hit.
Yeah.
We're having so much fun. Check out our freedom. Don't.
Yeah.
Have you ever, you know who Keith Green was? The singer?
Yes.
Songwriter? Have you ever heard his testimony?
I don't think so.
He was a rising rock star in the
Yeah.
early 70s and just seeking God, just, who is God?
Yeah.
And he said, I studied Buddhism, and the Buddhists said Jesus was a Buddha.
Yeah.
And then I looked into Muslims, and they believed that Jesus was a prophet.
It's prophet. Yeah.
And all these things. And he says, so every religion I looked into talked about Jesus.
Yeah.
So he said, well, I need to see what Jesus said about
What does he
himself.
say about himself?
So he read the Bible.
Yeah.
And he was Jewish by birth, but his parents were Christian Science.
Yeah.
So all messed up.
Yeah.
And, but he on his own, reading his Bible, it took him about 2 years, he came to Christ.
He came to Christ. Yeah.
Because he was seeking.
And God was faithful.
Yeah.
God's faithful to
Makes
his
me think
seekers.
of Lee Strobel, though.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
seeking to disprove him.
And he was seeking to disprove, and God still. Yeah, I love More Than a Carpenter. It's a great book. Great book. Yeah. Yeah. So seek. That's what God's called. And even when we know the gospel, keep seeking, keep looking and learning, and God's faithful to teach and grow, and it's an amazing thing. So I love stuff like this. Do you want to say something, Miss Karen?
In Isaiah it talks about the root of Jesse's tree,
Yeah.
but I never realized in Daniel it was saying, see if I can find it again. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you. And that's what we have as our logo.
Yeah. The
tree with
tree
the roots.
coming out the
And
root.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking, but I didn't know that was here
Yeah.
till tonight.
Here's another, and we'll talk about this next week, but at the end of Matthew 2, after they return to Nazareth, Jesus will say, instead of Nazareth, to fulfill what was spoken to the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. I've talked about this a little bit. If you go read the Old Testament, you know how often it talks about the Messiah will be called a Nazarene? Never says it a single
I was
time.
going to say, I don't remember.
Yeah.
So is Matthew just lying? But what is, what the word for root is in Hebrew? It's the word nazer.
Oh, Nazareth.
I think Matthew is playing on that the nazer would come. It's from Nazareth. Nazareth means stick town. It's from sticks, But yeah, I think that's Matthew's claim that Jesus is the stick from Nazarene that's talked about all the way back there. It's just cool stuff, I love. I'll go into more detail about that next week. It's fascinating. So, all right, let me pray, and God, thank you for just this story of how you call seekers, that you can speak the language of every culture. So while we fret to wonder, what do we do to reach this town, and how do we? You already know. You are aware of how to reach Portales. So God, I pray that you would just establish this church as a lighthouse to this town. And yes, let us go out, let us serve, let us take care and love and demonstrate the gospel in incredible ways. But let this be a place that as seekers go to find and search, that they keep just stumbling across First Baptist. And that we would have the chance over and over again to point people to the true light of the gospel. That we would celebrate new lives, changed realities, forgiveness of sins, great things to the glory of your name. Thank you for that. And let us at the same time be seekers. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Is it still recording?
Mhm.